Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland.
Hey, welcome in, everybody. It is the Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by Dwayne McFarland, Pro Football Focus, and EstablishTheRun.com. And it's a tombstone kind of night here if you're joining us on YouTube and you see our little thumbnail for the week. So we're going to have a little fun with that this week. It's week 11. We've got 4 teams on bye: Bills, Bears, Giants, and 49ers. So, we're going to get right into it, and we're not going to talk running back. We're going to start wide receiver because as Dwayne and I do absolutely zero prep together, like some podcasts probably send stuff back and forth all day long. Dwayne and I literally send one text at like 3:00 in the afternoon, like, "Hey man, you good? Yep. All right. See you then." And then we get on. I go, "Hey man, we're going to talk receivers first." He goes, "Absolutely. That's the most interesting guys." So we're on the right wavelength. So you running back guys, just kind of hang out. We'll get to them. And, to anyone, I would like to apologize to anyone I have not yet offended. I'm sure I will eventually. I already screwed the quote up, Dwayne. Damn it.
Yeah.
My Doc Holliday quote, I had it. Screw it.
Nobody cares. You can still do it. You can still do it.
All
right.
You tell them I'm coming. Hell's coming with me. We'll roll into that one.
Now you're going to use that one.
Yeah, I got a whole list of them here. Trust me. I appreciate everybody also on the in the chat room here in YouTube. And we're right around 1,000 subscribers. So thanks so much to all our pals out there who are hitting that subscribe button. If you haven't done so yet, please do so. Comment on the show, hit that like button, and it helps us greatly, especially if you get to 1,000 subscribers. But let's kick things off here at wide receiver, Dwayne. So after seeing a team high 8 targets and posting a top 20 finish on the week, it's clear that Michael Pittman is ready to step into the spotlight. While people might have missed out on Justin Jefferson or Travis Fulgham earlier this year, we have a wide receiver 1 on a team who is owned in just 10% of Yahoo leagues. So Dwayne, he has the look of both predator and prey, and I want one. So you got some great data, I know, about how he's being used differently than he was pre-injury. So lay that on us.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you have to remember here, right? So this is the Colts offense, and it's really styled after the Eagles offense, right? Doug Peterson is where Frank Reich, came from. Even though Frank Reich is not, he's not calling the plays, this is still it's an offense that they want to spread the ball around, right? So Rivers, really his goal is just to go to the open guy. So I don't think you're going to see a true alpha in this situation, but I do think that Pittman is the guy to own, clearly. The first few weeks he was a bit underwhelming, before he was injured, and really they weren't doing that much, really within Drake. But since he's come back, not only, have, his routes, risen from 54 to 83 to 95%, his targets have jumped from 3 to 18 to 23%. But I think the most fascinating thing really is how they're using him. So things they were not doing before the injury, such as moving him all over the field. So over the last 3 weeks, his slot routes, 50%, 49%, 39%, right? 37% of his targets are now coming on play action pass, right? That's 14% above the league average. If you guys, you don't know how much a play action pass is worth, you can go check my Twitter feed. I actually put it out there last year. How much more is a play action pass target worth than a regular target for wide receivers in 2020 in the NFL? So I'll leave that as a teaser there, but it's on my timeline. So, I mean, he's really being put into a premier situation, Drake, and he's being used, he's being targeted all over the field. Whereas before, he wasn't getting any targets behind the line of scrimmage, wasn't getting any targets 20-plus yards downfield. He was really just kind of a possession guy, And now, the last 2 weeks, 20-plus yard targets, he's got 4 of those already. 10 to 19-yard targets, he's got 1 in each game. 0 to 9 yards, he's got 2 and 5, and then he's got a behind the line of scrimmage target in each game. So he led the team last week with 8 targets. He finished as wide receiver 18 on the week. And yeah, I mean, I think right now you're looking at him as a wide receiver 4, but I think easily I would not be surprised if next week we're like, oh yeah, he's a wide receiver 3 pushing towards a wide receiver 2. I do believe he's a must own in every format. It's like you said, we've seen what these rookies can do, and he seems to be fully healthy. And they're integrating him into the offense, man. There's not much more you can ask for.
Yeah. I mean, their tight ends are all hurt. They've got a mess at running back, which we'll get to a little later in the show. And who else is on the outside? You've got the corpse of T.Y. Hilton and Zach Pascal and some other scrubs. So this is a guy they went out and got for a reason. Let's move on now to L.A., where, you thought 10% ownership was low in Yahoo on Michael Pittman. Try 5% for Josh Reynolds. In a PPR format, he scored over 11 points 3 of the last 4 weeks. His targets have increased every single week from week 5 on. Dwayne, is this, I know this is someone you were high on coming into this week for DFS as we texted back and forth, but now the speedy Reynolds is seeing some usage that season-long players can't ignore.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you have in Reynolds, if you've like Brandon Cooks, say, over the last couple of years, which most people did, right? He was being drafted last year, I want to say like round 5, Drake, in 12-team leagues. The year before, I want to say he was a round 3, a round 4 pick in the Rams offense. Well, Josh Reynolds is essentially playing that position. Over the last 4 weeks, he's really become the true starter. He's not splitting time with Van Jefferson anymore. He's still going to have to battle with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. But if you look at him over the last 4 weeks, he's had 5, 8, 8, and 10 targets, 430 air yards. He leads the team in that span. 2 of those weeks, he's been the top targeted player on the team. He leaves the field less than Cooper Kupp. Like, Cooper Kupp can get into these situations where all of a sudden they decide they want to use 2 tight ends, or they want to go with more of a heavy personnel group, or they just get ahead. And then that really lends itself to that sort of a style of offense as well. Well, then that's where you see Cooper Kupp take his dips, right? Whereas, now Kupp's still obviously the most valuable receiver on the team, but the good thing with Reynolds is he stays on the field every week, and he's getting these deep looks. 34% of his targets have come via play action, so not quite as good as Michael Pittman, but to your point, had a top 24 receiver finish last week. I think he was wide receiver 19, just one spot behind Pittman. And this is still a young ascending player, Drake. He's a guy that a lot of draftniks liked when he was coming out of Texas A&M. He just hasn't really had a shot because he had really good players in front of him. When he was a rookie, I believe that was the year they traded for Sammy Watkins, who they ended up moving on from, but then they traded for Brandon Cooks. And so it's just a situation where he's just kind of been stuck. Well, now the opportunity was open and he's beat out Van Jefferson for the role, and he's the guy stretching the field. So I think, when I look at Reynolds, I think he's in that same range as Pittman, maybe a little bit better for right now. Pittman we could feel different about, in a week or two. But I think they're both, he's shown it for longer basically, but they're both really close. And I would like to own both players, especially if I'm hurting at receiver. I'm not going to be shy with either one of these players. We don't have much time left, right? Yeah. And the seasons are going to be over. You're going to be in your playoffs. So it's kind of, if you get a chance on a young player that's trending upward, at this point in the year, you got to pull the trigger, in my opinion. So these are 2 guys that I will be after on the waiver wires in every single league that I'm in if I don't own them already.
Pull the trigger. Say when. That's it. We'll mix them in.
Just my game, Drake.
Yeah. So we got some guys in the chat room here talking. We will get to the questions. We kind of like to, get the show going, but we see some good stuff in there. We'll pop it up, as we go. So we don't see you, folks, all across YouTube, and got a couple of Twitch guys. Always mad props to our Twitch guys who pop in every single week. So, if you're on Twitch and you ask a question, we will answer it. That's for sure. Let's see here. Who's next? So we've talked about the last few shows, Jacoby Myers, Jalen Reagor, both should be owned in anything above 10 teams, any of those formats. Myers only owned in 48% of leagues, Reagor in 26. Some quick thoughts on these two for week 11.
Yeah, Myers has been over, right at or over 40% of the targets every week, right, over the last 3 weeks. So he's the man. We'll have to see what impact does it have if Edelman can return, right? And I think the better the Patriots are doing, the more likely it is that we do see some Edelman. But Edelman, even before Drake, before the surgery, they were really his role had been reduced. So I think it's going to be kind of tough, for them to really just say, we're not going to continue to use Myers in the way that we're doing it. But you never know, right? Edelman's a guy that's been around a long time with the organization. So that's really the only threat right now to Myers. Otherwise, this is his passing game. Yep. And in that offense, you need 30 to 40% of the targets, right? Because they'll slow things down. They'll run the ball a lot. Now this last week, that was the perfect weather for like Baltimore versus, New England, two teams that love to run the ball, and they just proceeded to do so. But yeah, I think the only threat for him is Edelman. He shouldn't be free in any league. Like, he shouldn't be free in any format. He should be out there. I mean, he should be on teams. As far as Reagor goes, I mean, he surpassed Fulgham this week, and he 91% of the routes. That was tops on the team. I'm also tops on the team with 20% of the targets. So, I mean, Reagor is going to be right in the mix as one of the top 3 weapons every single week, in my opinion. With the Eagles, we saw they wanted to do this early in the season with him, Drake. He's just been unlucky. But it's another one of these young guys that he really shouldn't be on the wire. He's on the wire less, than these other 2 guys because, he's been talked about a little bit more as a preemptive pickup and things like that. So you're not going to find him quite as much, but he definitely shouldn't be out there. And again, I think it's going to be spread around. I don't see any of these guys that we're talking about, Drake, turning, besides Myers, who's already done it, right? I don't see any of these guys, Reynolds, Pittman, Reagor, they're all in similar offenses, right? They're all going to spread it around. You're going to have weeks where they're only going to get 10% of the targets, and you just have to live with it. But there's going to be weeks where they get 25%. The reason I like Reynolds, like I kind of lean to him, Drake, is just he has such a high ADOT. So in the weeks where he still only gets 2 or 3 targets, like it could still be for like 75 air yards, right? He can just connect on one play and he pays off for you. Whereas Pittman, we know the Colts have really rotated who they've gone to throughout the year. And again, I think everything I'm seeing with Pittman looks really good. And I think Pittman's upside is larger than Reynolds. And then I would say with Reagor, I'd probably rank him right there with Pittman. I think Reynolds is the guy because of the ADOT. If I just had to trust somebody week in, week out, it would be him. But I think Reagor, like Pittman, is the guy with a little bit more upside because even though the offenses are going to be balanced, I could see both of those guys turning into the number 1 option on their team, even though it's more like a 2A, right? Because there's not a true 1A on those teams.
Right. And you're going to see in Philly, Zach Ertz will be back. Not sure what he's going to bring to that offense, but Fulgham's not going to go away. He did get a lot of Bradbury treatment this week, but they drafted Reagor in the first round for a reason. They're going to want to get to him. This is interesting, and our friend Shirley, who was with us last week, chimed in here. She says, "I hear pick up Pittman and Reynolds in all formats, but they never consider whom they have to drop." And she was asking earlier about dropping a guy like Allen Robinson for Pittman or Reynolds. No. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, no, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, depending on your roster, right? These guys just basically shouldn't be on the wire in 12-person leagues, right? And in 10-team leagues, I still think they shouldn't be on the wire, but you've got to have the right kind of roster to go pick them up. Don't drop somebody like Allen Robinson. So I mean, you're looking more along. Trying to think, Drake, of somebody, that we can talk about here. Hang on one second. Let me pull up something.
Yeah, I mean, if you're carrying,
I think this is a really good question. So
if you're carrying like a second tight end, or like you got like a Phillip Lindsay or somebody on your bench,
and sometimes it's not that easy. Let me give some names. Like, here's some names that I would carry. I would carry those guys over, right? I'm going to carry those guys over Sammy Watkins, AJ Green, Darnell Mooney, Michael Gallup, Laviska Shenault, Nelson Aguilar, Randall Cobb, maybe even Marquise Brown. Dude, I mean, it's just like I'm probably just going to hang on to Brown and hope that things get going. But everything we worried about with the Ravens offense last year, which was that they were going to run a lot, they were going to rotate everybody, how in the world would you really get a wide receiver 1 out of that situation? Everything that we worried about last year, that they just overcame all odds and had this crazy season, is actually coming to fruition this year. All those problems have shown themselves, so the Ravens, they just run the ball so much. So while Marquise Brown also has a great ADOT, well, his quarterback's not on the same page with him, and they run, far more running plays than some of these other teams we're talking about. I would want to own all those guys over Cole Beasley, probably over Curtis Samuel. When you get to Corey Davis and CeeDee Lamb and Mike Williams and Sterling Shepard, that's kind of where I start considering those guys to be. They're in that range, right? At those points, you've got a decision to make. So I would consider them just outside of that, is about where I would put them. Hopefully that helps.
You mentioned Cole Beasley, and he's somebody that no one's excited to pick up and play, but the Bills slot receiver has major upside with John Brown going down, re-aggravating an ankle injury from earlier. So during the weeks where Brown was out, Beasley was actually returning top 15 fantasy football wide receiver numbers. So last week collected 11 of his 13 targets for 109 and a touchdown. So Dwayne, with the Bills all but abandoning the running game of late, what are your thoughts on Beasley and this Bills attack? Especially in a full PPR.
And as far as we know, I think the last I heard on John Brown is high ankle sprain. Is that still accurate, or do you know?
I will
anyway,
double check.
Yeah, I think it is high ankle sprain, but
which could be 3-4 weeks.
Right. So we'll just have to watch the practice reports. I haven't seen a for sure confirmation on that. That's what people suspect. But yeah, Cole Beasley. You got a bye week this week. So you got to think about that. So you don't want to go crazy, on a guy like Beasley. But yeah, I think as long as John Brown's out, he's a little bit more viable. If you're in a super deep league, Gabriel Davis, he becomes, viable as well. He's actually played really well in the time that he's had on the field. Yeah. And he seems to have a connection with Josh Allen, and he would be working more of the deep stuff. Obviously, Cole Beasley's going to continue to work underneath, out of the slot. And really, Beasley's kind of uncoverable. Like when you watch the games, like they have their hands full with Diggs, and it was Brown. You won't have that now, but it's just it's the matchups that Beasley gets out of the slot with everybody having to pay attention to the receivers going over the top. It's just tough to find the right matchup to take care of him. He's really good in and out of his breaks, and he's just open all the time. And you've seen that when Josh Allen locks onto him, he will, and that's where you get these 12 and 13, and you get those type target games.
Cole Beasley was wide receiver 2 in week 10, which is crazy. But yeah, he's on bye this week. The team doesn't have to put out an injury report, so we probably won't hear anything on John Brown. But if it's a high ankle, you can just assume 3-4 weeks. We'll see what's going on there. Allen Lazard is returning from injured reserve. They activated him finally, and he should slide back into his wide receiver 2 role with the Packers. This all but, in my mind, puts the nail in Robert Tonyan's coffin. I actually dropped him in a couple of leagues this week. But Dwayne, I want to hear your thoughts on Lazard and our old pal MVS, who seems to make a splash play every single week. Now, I don't trust MVS in a season-long lineup, but I want to hear what you think about this Packers offense going forward.
I don't trust Lazard or MVS at this point. I think MVS has played good enough, dude, that he's really come on the last couple of weeks, and he's a good deep threat. And Adams is not really the deep threat, right? Adams works underneath. He works intermediate. And so Valdez-Scantling, over the last 3 weeks, his ADOTs are 18, 17, and 16. He's got 68 and 98 air yards over the last 2 weeks. He's got 4 games of 100 air yards or more on the season. So I think his role is really kind of, he's playing right into it, and he's doing a good job. So I wouldn't be surprised if when Lazard comes back that it's a little more of a rotation than what we thought, right? I think they do prefer Lazard as the run blocker, and they like to run the football. So I think that's going to go his way. The interesting part, let me pull up Tonyan real quick on Tonyan Drake, is last week was actually his highest utilization week in 5 weeks, 71% of the routes, 62% of the snaps, 13% of the targets. So Tonyan is a guy that you got to remember, a couple of weeks ago, he got hurt and he was playing hurt. And so I do wonder, if there's something to that, if that was part of, why we saw the downturn with Tonyan. I'm not saying he's a guy that is screaming value and you got to go pick him up, but if he's available and you really do need a tight end, you can do worse than Robert Tonyan. I think that
barely.
Well, look, if he keeps running 70% of the routes, he's going to be fine. He's going to be like every other. Look, we don't have very many tight ends that are a tight end 1 every week. There's just a handful. The rest of them,
Kelsey and a bunch of garbage.
Yeah, the rest of the guys, you're going to be in and out, right? Of the top 12 tight ends. So Tonyan will be right there in that group. If you can figure out which matchups you want to use him on, then great.
It's crazy. I actually dropped him for Jacob Hollister, kind of chasing some upside there. And as you can imagine,
Hollister disappeared. Yeah, Greg Olsen, everything for Greg Olsen went back up. Now, part of that might be because Tyler Lockett, has an MCL issue and was coming off the field some. And I think at that point, Lockett was just a decoy for that game. Because if you notice, he started off hot. He had like 6 targets right away. Like before halftime, I believe he had his 6 targets. And I don't know that he may have seen one more target after halftime. So that's something where you could see Olsen see a little bit of a bump because one of the top 2 guys is out. I don't think there's just a clear replacement, right, for Lockett. I think it's going to be spread around a few guys. I think Olsen will be part of that. I definitely think that David Moore will be part of that. He's right there in that wide receiver 5 mix. He's capable of a wide receiver 2 any week, but he's also capable of giving you a wide receiver 5 week, which you just don't want him in your lineup. But he has some rapport, with Russell Wilson, and he's never got to play, Drake, in an offense that's been this wide open, right? When Moore was in and playing and even playing well, this offense was much more conservative in those years. So it would be interesting to see what David Moore can do in this offense with Russ, with them letting him pass more. And again, now Russ is on a downturn because everybody's just basically saying, we're just not going to let you beat us deep. They're just dropping everybody into coverage. And so the Seahawks are going to have to adapt. I'm surprised it's taking them this long, but it's been 3 weeks now of defenses doing this to them, and they still just think they're going to drop back and do the same thing. So they're going to have to change some things up to draw the safeties back down, to get the coverage back down. So they may even need to run the ball a little bit more just to lure the defense in.
And that could happen this week. I had a little Seahawks blurb for later in the show, but we're talking about them. I'll bring it up now. Tyler Lockett, for those who don't know, didn't practice now 2 days in a row with a knee sprain. They play Thursday night in a great game with Arizona, which is going to be fantastic to watch. About time we get a really nice Thursday game. If Pete Carroll comes out and says, oh, hey, he's okay, blah, 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 I don't trust him. Pete Carroll even said, he's kind of iffy. He wasn't looking good. To me, that means he's dead. He might be in a hospital. He might have had his leg amputated. I don't think Tyler Lockett's going to play.
Or it's reverse. Of that. And when Pete Carroll actually says something like that, it actually means the guy's going to play. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, he's
if Tyler Lockett's going to start, you playing. You just, you've got to have somebody else really good, right? Most people aren't going to have a wide receiver. Now, maybe in 2 wide receiver leagues, in shallower leagues, you might have an option you feel comfortable with. But in a lot of deeper leagues, it's really tough to bench Tyler Lockett if he's playing.
Evidently, Pete Carroll is an educated man. Now I really hate him. See, crowbarring them all in. Gotta get him in here.
Keep doing it. Love it.
So also, we're talking about the Seahawks. Carlos Hyde did get a full participant label today in practice. Chris Carson was limited. I don't think we're going to see him this week. If Carlos Hyde is back, folks, check your waiver wire. Carlos Hyde's probably available. Have you seen the total scrubs that they're running out in Seattle? Alex Collins. I jokingly sent Dwayne a text 2 weeks ago. I'm like, hey, I'm starting Alex Collins in all my DFS lineups. But you're running Alex Collins, DJ Dallas, Travis Homer. If Carlos Hyde's going to be able to play, he's going to get 20 carries on Thursday night. And maybe they kind of revert back to, hey, let's pound the rock and get things under control, because they're going to have 38 guys covering DK Metcalf down the field with really no one else to beat them.
Yeah, I think realistically what you're hoping for with Hyde is 12 to 14 carries, which is around, where the good games for Carson have been. But I totally think that's possible, and I think they'll still use him even a little bit in the passing game. I think you'll pick up 2 or 3 targets out of him. So in the right scenario, Drake, I think 20 touches is within reach. I think realistically 16 to 17, but it's in a good offense, right? In a game that should end up being a shootout. And you've got a team that's willing to go one-on-one with these receivers. So, this is the team that we saw Lockett, light up, however many weeks ago it was, Drake. He had some just insane catches, on Patrick Peterson. He did it against everybody, on the Cardinals. He didn't really care, who it was. It will be interesting with Metcalf now, though. If Lockett's out, I expect all attention to be on Metcalf.
Yeah, in week 7, Tyler Lockett just had sort of a ho-hum effort. 20 targets, 15 catches for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's like Madden shit right there. Wow. That's pretty crazy. Let's keep rolling here at wide receiver. While he's no longer the top wide receiver in fantasy, AB, Antonio Brown, popped back on the radar this week. 7 catches for 69 yards. You are seeing some interesting utilization for Antonio Brown, and supposing he's still on the roster and not in jail or suspended. What do you think for the Bucs wide receiver 3?
Yeah, his routes, have kind of oscillated. They started off at like 80%, and this last week they were down at 60%, and that's because really the Bucs just decided the best way to beat the Panthers was to use more of the heavy personnel. Whereas in the 3 weeks before, we had seen really a curveball from Bruce Arians and Byron Leftwich, and they started using more of the 10 personnel. So I think it's just kind of back to the old days, right? With Tom Brady, they're going to come out and they're going to use whatever they think is going to help them win that game. And the Panthers' run defense is really bad. And they chose to stay in that set. And that's how Rojo got his work. Rojo is the guy that's on the field when Tom Brady's under center. When Tom Brady's not under center, Rojo's on the bench, or he's in the locker room, or on a bus on the way home. Like he's nowhere to be. He's not even near the stadium. But if they're going to be in that formation, then that's when Rojo gets used. And so that impacts everybody, right? I mean, but Mike Evans is typically going to be on the field. Godwin's typically going to be on the field. But the way it impacts them is there's less slot snaps to go around. The trend with Evans over the last few weeks is he's moving inside, Drake. So they're moving him inside more. And that means Chris Godwin doesn't get to move inside as much, and they're using AB on the outside. So whenever they go into 10 personnel, it's Godwin and Evans sometimes on the inside, and then you got AB, on the outside, and then you got Scotty Miller, other guys that they can get involved. They even get Tyler Johnson sometimes, involved, but a lot of times they want him in the slot. So I think it just comes down to matchups. But the good thing for AB is even though his routes dropped to 60%, his targets actually went up. And he was at 30% target rate on his routes run, right? Which is a good way to look at it, whenever you're trying to figure out, how involved they really want a player to be. So you look at the routes run first. That's really great. You look at target share. But then the next thing you can do is you can look at, the targets per route run. And that just gives you an idea of, because some players, they don't get on the field as much. Aaron Jones, we've talked about earlier this season, is a great example of that. But when they are on the field, I have a mosquito trying to bite me. When they are on the field, they go to him. And so that's what happened this last week with Brown. He had 21% of the targets, but 30% targets per route. So that's 8, which was enough to be right at the top, of the team. And that's enough with a guy like AB. If you can get 6 to 8 targets, I think you're going to have yourself a wide receiver 3 many weeks. You might be on the low end of a wide receiver 3, depending on how that goes. But, kind of back to your thing a couple of weeks ago that he's going to be a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1. I think you still have some of those weeks, but I think we're clearly seeing that it's an offense where they want to spread it around, like several that we've talked about tonight. That's just the way the league's going. There really aren't that many target funnels anymore like there used to be.
There used to be one in New Orleans, and it all went to Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas. And now we're going to see Drew Brees on the bench for Lord knows how long, and it becomes the Jameis Winston show. And friend of the show here, Sam Cooney in the chat room asks, Dwayne, is Michael Thomas still a must start? Can you imagine us thinking 11 weeks ago we were going to get this question? Michael Thomas, who is going as like in the top 7 picks. Is Michael Thomas still a must start with Jameis Winston under center?
Well, man, again, everything depends. I guess if you were to tell me you were in a 2-person league, right, and you only have to start one wide receiver, then no, I don't need to start him. But in most formats, it's still going to be tough to bench, Michael Thomas. The problem for Thomas will be that, Winston, is not a hyper accurate player, right? And Thomas, the way he wins, on the inside and tight coverage and things like that, I worry about Jameis throwing into those situations because, he can easily float one. He'll put it off the top of the fingertips. You get a pick. So I think it's obviously a downgrade from where we were with Drew Brees, but Jameis Winston's still functional, man, and they'll have to figure out how to run the offense a little bit, different. But at least with Thomas, I do think, he's still a guy that has good size. I worry a little more about Emmanuel Sanders, right, who's really the best route runner on the team, but I don't know that he's going to have the timing, with Winston. I think he could get more deep shots with Winston for sure, right, than what we've seen with Drew Brees. But yeah, for Michael Thomas, it's just going to be tough, to bench him. You guys have to give me some examples of who you're asking me. Would you bench so-and-so for Mike Thomas?
He's got guys like Deontay Johnson, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Brandon Cooks, even Swift at a flex. He could start over him.
I'm starting DeAndre Swift over him.
Mm-hmm.
DeAndre Swift's an RB.
Johnson too.
I would probably start Deontay Johnson over him. Yeah. I think those are both good calls. I mean, the rest are all, I get it. You have some really good receivers. Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Brandon Cooks, and T. Higgins, hopefully, and Brandon Cooks, hopefully we helped with those. I would start DeAndre Swift over Michael Thomas. I think DeAndre Swift is an RB1 the rest of the way.
Let's hit a few questions here from the chat room. Sempay24 asks, hey guys, looking for a 1 week QB with Josh Allen on bye. We're getting a bazillion questions. I just had my buddy Mike Bush text me, didn't realize I was doing the show. Come on, Mike, you should be watching this live. And asking about who do I put in to replace Josh Allen? And the question everybody asks is, do I dare pull Cam Newton from the waiver wire or go Jameis Winston? So 1,000 people are going to ask us this week, Dwayne, and I will throw it to you. Cam or Winston if you got to replace Josh Allen?
Cam, easily Cam. Now, I like the matchup for Winston. Here's my problem with Winston, Drake. I think Taysom Hill's going to play even more now. I think Taysom Hill is a real problem for Jameis Winston's ceiling. I don't think it's going to be a situation now where you have Drew Brees and there's all this respect, right? And so Taysom Hill, it's somewhat limited, right, how much he gets used. I think with Jameis on the field, we're probably going to see double what we were used to seeing out of Taysom Hill. And they paid Taysom Hill quite a bit of money. I mean, they may want to actually see him throw the ball a little bit. So Jameis, I think it's shakier than people think because of Taysom Hill and what his role could be. Obviously, the Atlanta matchup is like, it doesn't get better, right? The Atlanta matchup is superb. Here's the thing with Cam. His matchup isn't bad either, right? I mean, he's got Houston. So go look at Cam's game logs. I mean, he pretty much scores a rushing touchdown every week. And he can give you 2 plus as many as 2 passing touchdowns despite all his crappy weapons. So I don't think there's any way Jameis Winston even has the upside that Cam Newton has. Cam Newton is basically like Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill put together, right? And more. So even though he's got some weapon issues, overall, Cam has been consistent. He's had 1 or 2 real stinkers, Drake, but overall, go look at him. I mean, he's over 20 points pretty much every week.
Yeah, I had that decision. I mean, Carson Wentz and Cam Newton, and I'm probably going to go Cam myself.
I'm with Brandon Stanford in the chat room. I go Alex Smith over Winston too. Wow. Alex Smith is just going to drop back and just throw the ball, a ton. I mean, that's just what's going to happen with Washington the rest of the way. I know we'll probably get your boy McKissic here later, but I mean, he gets a matchup against Cincinnati this week, then Dallas. So you get Josh Allen back, obviously, but if you needed somebody for a couple of weeks, I mean, Alex Smith, that's about as far as I would trust him. After that, they could try to give Haskins a look again, right, or something like that. So, I mean, you get Pittsburgh in week 13 and San Francisco in week 14, which isn't as bad as it used to be. But, week 15, Seattle, right, for Alex Smith, if that's your championship game. So if it's something where maybe you're carrying Teddy Bridgewater and you're maybe worried about his knee or Stafford's thumb, something like that. I mean, Alex Smith, if you're in a super deep league, I don't mind carrying him.
How about this from Steven Dominguez, who watches every week? Hey, guys, I lost Teddy and possibly Stafford. We were going to get to the news there. Stafford with a partially torn ligament in his throwing thumb. Start Cousins versus Dallas or spend some fab for Jameis. Or if Stafford's available, do I just start him? I can't start a quarterback with a torn ligament in his throwing thumb. That just, to me, seems like a recipe for disaster, which means he's going to throw for 404 next week.
I think it just depends on what we're hearing from, the medical community, right? And in fantasy, which is really, really great now. And I haven't had a chance to go read. But I think they're still probably all trying to figure out what exactly is this injury, because there truly are some injuries that players really can't play with and they think they're going to be fine. So I would really lean more on those folks for the expertise. And that's what I'm going to go read. And if I read from people that I trust in the medical community that they think Stafford's fine based on the injury we believe he has, then I'm fine. If not, then I'm steering away from him. I'm going to start Kirk Cousins over Jameis Winston. Again, I'm just worried about Winston, man. I really think he could be limited to like 20 to 20 passes. I think you could literally see Taysom Hill inside the 5 every time they get there. That's a possibility. And Taysom Hill could just take who knows, he might just take a whole drive. Jameis didn't look good in that game. I watched most of that game and Jameis did not look right. He looked like Jameis, and this is a timing offense. This is an offense that, is very intricate in the way it's designed. And Jameis is not the fit that Teddy Bridgewater was. And it's not to say Jameis is a worse quarterback than Teddy. They're just very different. Teddy, he loves to dink and dunk, and he can do the timing thing. And it was perfect for their offense because it matched Drew Brees. That's not what Jameis Winston is. And so I just worry about the fit.
I tweeted earlier this week, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, spend $1 on Taysom Hill. Just throw it out there. You probably could get him for free, and no one's going to pick him up. But halfway through that game, when Winston is super ineffective and the receivers are pissed and they're sitting on the bench looking at Sean Payton, and they're like, what the hell? This guy can't get us the ball. You might see him go to our, the wonder kid there.
Yeah, dude. Here's the thing with Taysom Hill. We've seen Tebow put up 25 and 30 points a game as a fantasy quarterback. So Taysom Hill, if you've got a quarterback that's willing to run as much as he's going to run, there's going to be value, in what he can do. And we still really don't know what he is as a passer, right? Maybe he's got a little more than we think. Obviously it's not like elite, or we would already be seeing a little bit more of it, but we'll see what happens. He's definitely a concern for Winston, and I like the idea of just stashing him if you're in a really deep league and you got a spot.
Yeah, that's enough Jameis talk for one day. Let me hit a couple of quick news and notes here. Kansas City placed both offensive starting tackles on the COVID list, so hashtag yikes. I guess we could say that's normal life for 2020, but there's no normal life, Dwayne. It's just life. Get on with it. Another one. If anybody out there is wondering what these random quotes are, it's a Tombstone theme week here. It's one of Dwayne and I's favorite movies. What else happened this week? Let's see. Kenyon Drake returned. He was limited on Tuesday in practice, but he did come back on Sunday and take his grinder role for the Cardinals. 16 rushes for 100 yards. This week, he's off to Seattle, where he posted a whole 34 yards rushing in week 7. Hooray. I started him that week. So what are your thoughts on this Cards backfield going forward? Edmonds, while he had a ton of opportunity, kind of let people down, and now it's back to Drake and this, split. So, I think it's just back to what it was. If you got Drake and you need him and you hope he gets you 10 points, it is what it is. Maybe you pray he falls in the end zone.
Yeah, and I think Drake's just slightly less than what he was before, because before he was getting more of the long down and distance work. And a lot of times the long down and distance back, because teams like to blitz on 3rd and long. A lot of times your long down and distance back needs to be a good pass blocker. So if the quarterback checks, right, to something different at the line of scrimmage, and it's not always just a hot, right? Because if you got 8 yards to go or 10 or 11 yards to go, a hot to your running back is likely not getting you the first down, right? If it's 3rd down and 3, then it's fine. You can just have your scat back there. They choose to blitz, you check to your hot, and you just hit him in the flat first down. That's not the case on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9. So typically you'll see the back they prefer as a blocker. And I think Chase Edmonds earned a little bit more in the time. While to your point, he didn't blow anybody away. Mm-hmm. He evidently impressed their coaching staff. Now we'll watch. It's 1 week, right, with Kenyon Drake back. But he got all of the long down and distance work. When I say he, Chase Edmonds, he got all of the 2-minute work. Whereas before, Kenyon Drake was getting the long down and distance work, which gave him a chance to be more involved in the passing game. So I think now Drake is truly, to your point, he's worth about 50% of the rushing attempts. Kyler's going to be 20 to 25%. Chase Edmonds is going to be 20 to 25%. I don't, at least before I thought Drake could get 2 targets a game. It might be literally 0 now. And you're just hoping that Kyler decides to let him run one in instead of just taking it in on his own.
Last little piece of quarterback news here. Teddy Bridgewater, we mentioned him a little bit, was limited with a minor MCL sprain in his knee. Expected to play. We'll see what happens there. behind him is former XFL stars at PJ Walker. So he could come in and who knows what that's going to do to your Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore shares going forward.
It hurts everybody.
Big time. And surprise, surprise, Christian McCaffrey is going to miss another week. Now, not that I revel in someone being hurt and being out, because I own Christian McCaffrey in a dynasty league that I'm currently in first place, and I'd love him to play. But I just get nuts on Twitter when I see these guys. They take a story and they go, "Oh, Christian McCaffrey got a second opinion. He's back. He'll be fine." Like, there's a reason you get a second opinion, is because the first one sucked and you want someone to tell you better news. So not that Mike Davis is doing anything. That was the easiest DFS fade in the world last week, was to not play Mike Davis. Because let's be honest, he hasn't done shit, Dwayne. Curtis Samuel is getting a lot of run. He had 2 or 3 carries just on their first drive alone. So he's definitely in the mix. Always the opportunity to vulture a touchdown from Mike Davis. I don't know if Mike Davis, to be honest, Dwayne, is even a must start anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most people, he's still going to be. His utilization is still the same. He just hasn't been as effective, right? And they were saying that he was dealing with some injuries earlier in the or a couple of weeks ago, right before CMC came back, and he looks like he may still be dealing with them. He just doesn't look as good as what he's, to your point, as what he looked in the past. But the utilization's all there. He was down a little bit this week because he missed some time in the fourth quarter due to his thumb. But I mean, he's a guy that's going to give you, Drake, 10 to 12 carries. They're kind of similar to the Seahawks, right? Not that they're vertical like that, but they're going to throw a lot more than they're going to run. And so he's still good for 4 to 5 targets a game. So in a PPR format, man, it's hard to ignore any running back that's going to get 4 to 5 targets every game and get like 10 to 12 carries. I mean, that's going to be an RB2 pretty much everywhere, even if they don't score touchdowns. So again, depends on your league size, but I'm fine with Mike Davis as an RB2. I think we just saw some crazy, outlier kind of performances from Davis early on in the season. And he's still a good player, right? He's just, he's not an all-world beater like we saw for a couple of weeks early on.
Yeah. If you go over to pff.com, you go to establishtheRun.com, they all have insane content, between the stuff Ian Harditz is putting out and Alex Erickson and Evan Silva and Adam Levitan and all those great guys at all those sites. But you're going to see the article that makes the most sense and makes you the most money. And that's the utilization report that my pal Dwayne McFarland puts out. And if you read it this week, you're going to read about Broncos wide receiver KJ Hamler and how many routes per drop back, how many routes run per drop back he is getting in Denver. But Dwayne, we have a question from a guy on Twitch, so we're going to answer it. What do you guys think about the Broncos quarterback situation and how it affects the weapons there, Judy, Patrick Hamler, etc.? Because there's bruised ribs for Drew Lock. We don't know what his status is going to be. He looks like crap anyways, but, hey, it is what it is. They got to play somebody.
Yeah. But Drew Lock, he's just really up and down, but he'll at least keep slinging it, right? The problem when they bring in a backup is they could try to change the whole game plan. At least when Drew Lock's out there, we know that they're going to run 11 personnel all game, and they're going to try to throw. And they know that that's really how they want to see what they have in Lock, because they're probably going to have a decision to make. And so we know that's how the game's going to work. Now, if you've got a backup, like they could really revert more to a Vic Fangio type style, right? They could try to run the ball more. It does impact everybody.
Brett Rippon or Jeff Driscoll.
Yeah, I think Brett Rippon is capable, right? He's a timing quarterback. He can get back. He can make the throws he needs to make. He's not excellent, but I don't know that he's a huge downgrade from Drew Lock, to be honest, for a guy like Hamler. Hamler works in the slot. He's working typically 6 to 8 yards from the line of scrimmage. He could be the perfect weapon for a guy, like Rippon. Driscoll, I don't like as much. I think he's less accurate. He's a better athlete. He can move around and make some big plays. So maybe it helps Judy a little bit. But Judy's a guy that wins with separation, right? So I'd probably rather have Rippon, there as well. So we'll just have to monitor it. I would say it's a slight downgrade. Judy is the one that's going to be really hard for me to bench. The other guys, I would probably willing to start other guys over most of them. And there's guys I would start over Judy, but that list is growing shorter and shorter by the week.
Interesting question here. Let me make sure I get the right guy up here from Ink. I hope that's your first name, Ink, and it's just full Ink. That's on the birth certificate. But he wants to know, should I buy low or sell high? Let's assume he's talking about Hamler, Judy, and these Broncos. Unsure of the situation at quarterback. Are we looking to sell these guys? Do we want to hold them? Because trade deadlines are approaching, if not already, probably this week or next week in most fantasy leagues. So if you have these Broncos guys, Dwayne, and you know this QB situation is shaky at best, what do you do with these guys?
Yeah, I'm always willing to move anybody, Drake. I mean, if the price has to be right, so I'm always willing to kick the tires on anything. So it's just a matter of what you get offered. So if you can sell high, and sell high means you get offered something in return you think that is at least equal in your mind to the value or slightly more than what Jerry Jeudy's worth. So yeah, I mean, I would be willing to do something like that. The Broncos, their schedule, Drake, it tightens up a little bit as well, right? So I worry a little bit about that. They get Miami, then they get New Orleans, then they get Kansas City, Carolina. So those are all pretty good. They're decent pass defenses from a respect of, covering wide receivers. I'm pulling that up right now, actually, while I'm sitting here looking at this. So Denver, where'd you go? Yeah, so for Denver, so Miami is about neutral. New Orleans is neutral, but KC minus 4.8 points. Carolina minus 6.7 points. Buffalo minus 5.6. So I don't know. Those teams don't just make me think there's no way I could start those guys, but the schedule does get tougher. So, I mean, if you can sell Judy and you really get something good back, then fine, go ahead. It's hard for me just because he's looked so good. But the quarterback challenges, I totally get it. But the quarterback just needs to be serviceable, right? We've talked about that on here before. It takes a really, really terrible quarterback to fully pull down the potential of a good wide receiver.
All right, let's get into these running backs, and specifically running backs you can target off the waiver wire. He's owned in 69% of leagues, but that means there's 31% of leagues that he's available, and that is J.D. McKissic of the Washington football team. Now, McKissic has the most targets in the NFL over the last 2 weeks. That's 29 targets. That's even more than a guy like Devontae Adams. So if he's out there, just check him out. Dwayne, I think you had a little something quick you want to mention on McKissic.
I mean, you just hit it. I mean, what's the difference? It's the quarterback, Alex Smith. So they know what Alex Smith likes to do. And so they're putting a player out there that's great at giving him what he wants. He's checked down Charlie, right? He wants to be able to check that ball down. And J.D. McKissic is, he's the beneficiary. So really, you've got a passing game that's got Terry McLaurin and, working intermediate and working deep, not as deep as much as he used to. Cam Sims is getting a little bit involved, but really it's just McKissic and McLaurin. And then you get a little bit of Antonio Gibson. That's essentially the passing game. Logan Thomas gets 3 or 4 targets a week. So it's to your point, it's McKissic and McLaurin that are going to be in, that 7 to 8, 9 target range. I thought it was probably just a fluke last week because when you saw how many routes McKissic ran, he'd never done it in all the rest of the season. What I didn't think about was the switch to Alex Smith. And so now that you see a second data point and it's the same thing again, that tells me, right, they're adjusting their offense based on Alex Smith. So I expect to see this continue as long as Alex Smith is the quarterback.
So there's only 3 weeks left in the fantasy regular season, guys. It's, obviously we're in week 11, 11, 12, 13, and boom, we're into the playoffs. So you can't be lazy. You can't rest on your laurels. You got to keep churning that bench, keep trying to find diamonds in the rough. And you may have found one in one of these next few running backs. Kalen Ballage. I mean, we've made fun of him for a year or two here on the show, but, not only does he get the Jets this week, but he saw 73% of the snaps. He's dominating touches. Chargers have the fifth, if I talk right, 5th most running back carries in the NFL so far. So Dwayne, he also has a stat that you love, and that involves carries inside the 10. And he owns it.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting everything. He is essentially getting what we hoped either Josh Kelly or Justin Jackson would get. We wanted one of them to take over a role, and who knew that it would take Kalen Ballage coming in to finally have one of these guys get all this work.
Mm-hmm.
Troymaine Pope, was a non-factor. Joshua Kelly was really – it wasn't a rotation. Josh Kelly was just the backup, right? He was the guy coming in and giving Ballage a little bit of relief. He did get one of the carries inside the 5. But Ballage – saw most of the work in the 2-minute offense, 77% of that work. He only saw 33% of the third, and fourth and long. So your long down and distance, that did go to Josh Kelly, who they do seem to trust in pass protection. But the rest, it all really went to Ballage. So yeah, if you see that Justin Jackson is out, Ballage against the Jets is easily in play this week. I think you put him in as an RB2. And you just let it roll. Things could change on us, and it could blow up. Ballage could all of a sudden just suck again. But I think he gets to play his old head coach.
Oh yeah, he's going off this week.
And again, Gase actually liked Ballage, right? He had him in Miami, and then he brought him to the Jets, and then they ended up letting him go again once they moved on from Le'Veon Bell. So Ballage, I'm fine with him as a running back 2 this week. If Justin Jackson's out, the other thing is Eckler's probably about a week to 2 weeks away. And once that happens, right, this is all gone. Mm-hmm. But to your point, you only have a couple weeks left. So if you got to win this game this week, Ballage is definitely in play if you need an RB2.
All these guys I'm going to mention, you can put in this week and feel semi-good about your running back situation. How about in Miami? You won't see Myles Gaskin for another few weeks at least. And this guy who literally nobody's ever heard of got the start and toted the rock 21 times for 85 yards and tied for the most red zone carries in the league in week 10. And, Dwayne, maybe it wasn't just Gaskin. Maybe this scheme is actually just good here in Miami. And I'm talking, of course, about Salvon Ahmed, who, again, nobody had any idea who this guy was. And a week ago, he got 7 carries for 38 yards. You're like, all right, just some other random guy. And then, boom, here he is just lighting things up for the Dolphins. For sure to be a top waiver ad for running back needy teams this week.
Yeah, I think he might give you a week or two. We're going to have to see what's going to happen. But, I don't really have anything to argue with. Breida could come back, but, Breida really played second fiddle to someone earlier in the season already, right? And hasn't really been involved. So there was this hope that Breida could be, a nice waiver wire ad when Gaskin went down.
Yeah.
That didn't materialize due to injury. So, yeah, I think right now this is the guy to own in Miami. Now, DeAndre Washington was in his second week this last week, and he was at least active. I think he had like 1 snap. So he could work his way in as he learns more. I don't trust this like fully, Drake. Like I'm not like, saying, hey, it's a guarantee slam dunk. But out of the guys that are probably available on the waiver wire, and you're talking about running backs, I agree with what you said, right? He's one of the guys that you can plug in. It may not go as well as we hope, but I think he's at least worth, half the carries on the team.
Wayne Gallman had another week of unspectacular. Man, I can't speak. I do sales for a living, so I'm just always constantly talking to people. And by now, where it's nearly 11 o'clock Eastern time when we're doing this live, you just kind of get done for the night. But unspectacular yardage. He hasn't cracked 70 yards in a game all season, but he scores. As Steve Stifler once said, you don't score until you score. So, quote from a different movie, but, we'll go with it. He's got 5 touchdowns in the Giants' last 4 games, and he had 2 against my lowly Eagles this week. If he doesn't score, he literally stinks and gives you nothing, but he's getting into the end zone. And sometimes at running back, that's all you need. And it's week 11. So if you're lighting a candle, saying a prayer, Wayne Gallman could, be your savior.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. You hit it all.
All right. Everyone,
he is
go
on.
Ahead.
Gallman's on bye. So
yeah, he's on bye, but hey,
so you could still plug him into your lineup though if you're really confident about the rest of your players. So,
but if you're out there and you think, okay, Devonta Freeman stinks. He's not going to come back and take this over. The Giants are winning. The Giants have a chance in this division. So Gallman could, run it out for the rest of the year. Everyone's chasing points in Indy, Dwayne. And after Nyheim Hines showing on Thursday, he's sure to be a waiver wire darling. Indianapolis released a depth chart today online, and it was all over Twitter. And Jonathan Taylor was listed at the RB1. And as our friend Doc Holliday would note, it appears their hypocrisy knows no bounds. Can we trust Hines as a viable RB2 or flex going forward here? Like what's going on with this backfield? Did Jonathan Taylor die?
It's all matchup based. It's matchup based. And the thing is, last week they went with a hot hand. Like if you were watching that game, like Nyheim Hines just looked way better than Jonathan Taylor. Like if I was watching the two backs, I'm like, get that fat, slow guy off the field. Put that little fast guy back out there. I mean, that's how I felt. Jonathan Taylor, let's be honest, he's looked crappy. This is a good offensive line.
You can't play him.
Not played well. He's not played well. I mean, there's nothing else to say about it. Look,
can you drop him in a redraft league? Would you drop Jonathan Taylor?
In an 8-team league, I got no problem with it if you're really deep, at running back. But he's a guy you still want to stash, I mean, I would rather not drop Jonathan Taylor because we never know the full story around things, right? Sometimes players are playing hurt. I mean, there could be all sorts of reasons for it. It may not even be a talent thing, right? So you have to be careful, with things like that. And you got to lean somewhat into the fact that he was still a second-round pick. He's a guy that was really productive in college. But, dude, his snaps have gone from 34, which is already terrible, 34% to 31% to 24% this last week. That's terrible, Drake. I mean, his rushing attempts, 28% to 29% to 23%. Like, he is literally, that's not even really a committee back anymore. That's a backup who's, sniffing somebody's jockstrap, like getting on the field, when the other guy needs a breather, and that's it. Yeah. Like he's not getting anything. He was getting the long down and distance work. That all went away this last week. He never gets the 2-minute drill work. He does get the carries. He gets some of the carries inside the 5, but they're giving some to the other guys too. So, I mean, in this past week, he had 25% of the carries inside the 5. So, I mean, they're spreading that around as well. So, I mean, there's no way you can have him in your lineup. No. When they say RB1, what they mean, what a coach means, and the coach still thinks they're telling the truth to the media, the guy that's going to start the game. Jonathan Taylor starts the game. Cam Akers started his game too this weekend. Do you want to put Cam Akers in your lineup? No.
Well, I mean, he's the next guy on my list here, so you might as well just talk about him.
Well, just repeat what I just said about Jonathan Taylor. But see, that's what's funny, right? People are not thinking about Jonathan Taylor the way they're thinking about Cam Akers. People have already moved on from Cam Akers. Jonathan Taylor's the same thing. 20% of the snaps, 20% of the carries. He might be there to salt away a win if they get ahead really big, but earlier in the season, they gave that role to Jordan Wilkins. You just have no clue. I mean, so he's just a stash only at this point, right? And you're super disappointed to own him.
Devontae Booker went 16 for 81 and 2 scores. Holy moly. So if you're a Josh Jacobs owner out there, he is the must-have handcuff. You got to get this guy. But Dwayne, can he carve out a weekly role for himself? I mean, John Gruden's kind of crazy. He loves to run the rock, to his core. Could Booker become like this kind of like 1B guy in Vegas?
I mean, he kind of already has. I mean, I talked about this in last week's utilization report. I didn't write about it this week. But if you look at it, over the last several weeks, you're seeing Devontae get out onto the field. He's gone from 14% to 26% to 36% of the snaps. Routes have gone from 10 to 15 to 16%. Rushing attempts has gone from 12 to 33 to 39%. He's got a role that's growing. Josh Jacobs, every one of his stats, despite the great week, are going in the other direction. And so it's just something. And look, Devontae Booker's not that good. Like, teams are eventually going to figure out. He runs it around the end every time. It's this pulling guard. It's like all the way to the sideline and then trying to cut it up. Like, that's literally like every run he has. And that's what he did in Denver too. He just had trouble running inside. So I think teams will eventually catch on to that. But it just sucks for Josh Jacobs because really Josh Jacobs did great this last week because he scored. But this really, it caps his upside, man, and when you got a guy like Jacobs that's as talented as him, you just want to get the full benefit, because Jacobs could be just unleash this guy, I mean, let him be your passing down back. Let him be everything. He can do it. You don't need to jack around with these other guys, man. These other guys are nobodies. But to your point, John Gruden likes that. He's done this his whole career, mix these sort of other backs in, and he just takes pride in it or something. And it's a problem. So with Jacobs, you're still going to start him every week, but it sucks that, his upside is capped, and that, his passing game work isn't going to always be there. It's just, it's a bummer.
We mentioned DeAndre Swift already a few times in the show, but I just want to empty the notebook here and see what else Dwayne has to say. He got the lion's share of the carries. See what I did there? On Sunday. Dwayne, he needs to be dominating the touches over scrubs like Carry On and this, 200-year-old AP. So if this was the turning point and we can keep a 15 carry, 5 target, 70 plus, snap share, this guy's an RB1 down the stretch, right?
Yes. And he did turn it. They said before the game, he's our starter. And so he had already been working in all the other critical situations. He was getting the 2-minute work. He had been seeing some of the long down and distance. He was getting about half the work inside the 5. So they already showed, unlike, he's the opposite of Ronald Jones. The way they broke him into the league was in really high stress, high leverage situations, and they were already using him. So you knew they trusted him. It was just a matter of when were they going to fully unleash the guy, which we didn't know. It might not have been this year. They might have kept using, the other guys, but they came out, they named him the starter, and he took over 73% of the snaps, 66% of the routes, 16% of the targets, 76% of the rushing attempts, despite them playing Washington and that being a potential revenge game for AP. No, they didn't even bother, with AP. They gave him 4 carries. You got 100% of the 2-minute work. They didn't have a carry inside the 5 this week. If you look at him, 80% of his targets were as a first read. Your average running back first read targets, 37%. So he's clearly integrated into their game plan. He's one of their primary weapons. He does need Matt Stafford to be healthy. You do not want to deal with, I believe it's Chase Daniels that's still the backup there. You don't want to deal with that. It's not good. It's manageable, but it's not good. The good thing about Swift is he's active in the passing game. So that helps you even when you have a bad quarterback. But you really want Stafford to be able to play. That's the one thing that could put a little bit of a damper on Swift moving forward. If Stafford isn't in there, he's probably more of a high-end RB2. If Stafford is in there and the offense can keep things moving, then he is an RB1 the rest of the way.
All right, guys, we're getting near the end of the show, so fire away if you got some questions. I'll line them up here for Dwayne, and we'll go through them in a quick fashion.
Real quick, Rick, think of all the bullets fired on rookie running backs this year. Swift's going to be the best one down the stretch. CEH was an end of a second-round pick that then moved into the first round, right? Started off the summer as basically round 2, pick 12, and then he became round 1, pick 6. Yeah, I'm not happy as a CEH owner right now. Not happy at all. It's a 3-way committee, and it sucks.
Yeah.
Jonathan Taylor was a 3rd or a 4th round pick. Jonathan Taylor sucks balls. We've got seriously Cam Akers, who we talked about on this show multiple times as part of the draft plan. But who was the other guy we talked about? DeAndre Swift, right? So of all those guys that we talked about, like Swift is the only one that's going to hit. And it took you 10 weeks to get there. So just a reminder, like we'll have to go back and think about this. Every year's different. It's its own animal, but you can't just always assume these rookie backs are just going to take off. It just doesn't always happen. And this is another year where that is proof. And it's something that I talked about at the beginning of the season before the draft. And I know a lot of people booed it because they don't want to hear that. They want to hear that, oh, it's a rookie back. He's the most talented guy. They spent a high pick. He's going to start. It doesn't always, the data shows it doesn't always work that way. That we've seen lesser backs that we thought were just scrubs keep rookie backs in committee situations. And we saw that multiple times this year. I mean, Nyheim Hines, right? And Jordan Wilkins, like that's keeping Jonathan Taylor off the field. Are you kidding me?
Scrub City.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So
All right, rapid fire, Dwayne. Here we go. A lot of guys asking about James Conner. Are we worried about him? And who are we handcuffing him with? Benny Snell or not Dwayne McFarland? Jeez Louise.
You're definitely not cuffing him with Dwayne McFarland. That would be that would be a disaster.
So Snell or McFarland as the cuff, and are you worried about Conner?
I'm not worried about Conner yet because everything bounced back from a utilization perspective. Snaps were there, routes were there, attempts were there. It's been a couple of different games, for the Steelers. The week before, right, they trailed the whole time. They just emptied the backfield out like we talked about, passed the ball a lot. But as far as Conner goes, everything really returned to normal other than his fantasy points. So, Conner hasn't lived up to what we hoped this year. Let's be honest, right? In the second round, I mean, he hasn't scored the touchdowns. That's really been a killer. We didn't think he was going to be some guy that's going to get 150 yards a game. He's not a super explosive athlete, but he's solid, and he's in a good offense, got a decent offensive line. It's not as good as it used to be, but we knew this offense was good enough that we thought he had the potential to score 10 touchdowns, right? Potential to catch 40 to 50 balls. He's also disappointed in the passing game because we didn't realize how quickly Chase Claypool was going to become really a good player. And so now you've got him plus Deontay Johnson has emerged. You already have Juju. There's just a lot of people to feed there. And Ben's not passing to his backs. So those guys are all just kind of out of the mix. But even though he's been a disappointment, like if you've set a baseline of what you think he is by looking at the first 8 weeks, that's what I still think he is. I'm not changing my view of him based on week 9 and 10 box scores because really the utilization was fine in week 10.
Is it time to give up on the Ravens? I don't really want to drop Hollywood, but yeah, this offense looks like crap.
That's a really good question. I'm borderline on it. I'm borderline on it. The thing with Hollywood that sucks is that the kind of player, he's out there, he's playing, right? He's not like Jonathan Taylor. It's not like the coaches literally said, just sit down somewhere. We don't really care where. We don't care if we can even see you because we may not even turn to tell you you're back in the game. Like Hollywood's playing. Hollywood is out there running his routes. He's pissed off because he's not getting the ball. The problem is teams have figured the Ravens out. And they've said, you've got to pass outside the hashes. We're going to make Lamar Jackson hit deep shots outside deep down the field. And he hasn't been able to do it. He doesn't put arc on the ball. His timing is off. He's just really struggling. And so teams are taking away the middle field and all those crossers that last year turned from play action into just huge plays. Now, if you watch the game, when they show you that view, watch all the guys floating in the middle. Like they literally are just doing everything they can to take away the middle of the field. And even though they're giving some nice situations on the outside, Lamar has not been able to make them pay. This isn't a Hollywood Brown problem. This is a Lamar Jackson problem.
Yeah. Thoughts on Ryan Tannehill? And I can add some insight here as I traded for Tannehill and have subsequently dropped him in a standard Yahoo league. He hasn't gotten over 20 points in 4 weeks. He hasn't completed over 20 passes in 4 weeks. In the last 2 weeks, he hasn't thrown for over 160 yards. So you cannot win with that. He's got Baltimore and Indy coming up the next 2 games on the road. Yeah, if you can find somebody else, I'm fine with getting off Ryan Tannehill. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's not even so much Tannehill. He's got the weapons. He would be fine. They've got offensive line problems right now. They've got some major freaking problems. The biggest difference for Tannehill, and I think we've mentioned this before, but over the first 6 games, and we called it out as the difference, this team was running 72 plays per game. This is an offense that last year and the year before didn't even run 60 plays per game, which is terrible. Like they were in the 50s. And if you look at week 7 through week 10, it's dropped 10 plays per game. So they're reverting back to their old selves on offense, whereas earlier this season, they were running better tempo. They were getting more plays in. They were just a more efficient offense, and they were letting the team run more plays. And now that's just deteriorating. So this past week, at least they got up to 65. The week before it was 55. But 2 out of the last 4 weeks, they haven't even got to 60 plays. And that's bad no matter who you are. Yeah. So those of you that own Kirk Cousins, those of you that own Baker Mayfield, that own whoever the 49ers quarterback is, that own any team that's a heavy run team, this is what you're dealing with. Tannehill is really back to being a guy that's in a heavy run scheme, and they're not running enough plays. So I mean, if you look at Baker, right? Baker has a 5-touchdown game, which I didn't necessarily think was legit, but then he turns around the next week and doesn't even get 10 fantasy points. Why? Because they just ran the ball the whole game.
Yeah.
You know, now some of that's weather. He's had 2 games with terrible weather where they've just ran the ball, but these are teams that want to run first, and that seems to be where Tennessee's headed. Like over the last 2, the run percentage, Drake, these are supposed to be quick fire, huh? I guess I forgot. 55% run and 49% run, which is well above the league averages over the last 2 weeks for the Titans.
This is Doc Holliday with the gun. You know, they're dueling out here, just trying to be quick. Is J.K. Dobbins droppable in a 12-team PPR?
Man, I would prefer to stash him. But I guess the thing is now, Drake, we've seen what it looks like with one of the guys gone. And even then, it still wasn't really very good for J.K. Dobbins, was it?
Didn't Justice Hill lead the backfield in snaps or something crazy like that?
No.
He played a lot, didn't he?
No, it wasn't really that much.
He's out there. Well, here's the problem. He's out there. So you got Ingram, you've got Gus the Boss, you got Dobbins, and now we got freaking Justice Hill along with Lamar Jackson running the ball all the time.
I don't know where you're getting the Justice Hill thing. He's played 2, 3, and 4 snaps. But to your point, they rotate all these guys. If you've got to do it and there's just something that you really feel like you want to grab, go ahead. If I can keep him stashed, I prefer to keep him as a stash though. And here's why. He's a good talent. He's still on an offense that could get things turned around. It's kind of like Jonathan Taylor. I just prefer to stash him, right. And the good thing for him is he is the passing down back. So he's already won that. And so there's anytime you've won that, that's like a great baseline. That's what you're looking for in a PPR league, especially, right? You're looking for backs that catch passes and you're building off of that because targets are worth way more than carries. And so Dobbins does have that going for him. He's impossible to start right now. I get it. So if you got to make a move, go ahead.
Sam Cooney asks, would you rather pick up Allen Lazard or Damian Harris?
I would rather not pick up either one. No, I mean, again, it kind of depends on your roster and what you need, but I guess what you're saying is you're wanting to flex one of them, this weekend, or it's just a backup on your roster that would be a potential flex play. This kind of turns into a schedule question, to be honest. So I'm looking running back. You've got New England. So Damian Harris is still Sony Michel, meaning he's going to have games where they can keep things just the way they want them, and he's going to see 15, 17, maybe 20 like last week carries. But in games where it doesn't go their way, he's going to see 8 to 10. He's exactly the same thing as Sony Michel. His role is no different. So I tell you that because think about how you really felt about Sony Michel and then apply that to really Damian Harris. Their utilization is the same way. So it'll help you answer the question. But looking at New England and, what they have, Drake from a schedule standpoint against the run, this week you get a plus 6.6 matchup against Houston. So if you're talking about just for this week, I'm probably leaning to Harris. That's a game that I expect to be close. And I expect Harris to continue to be a viable option. So at least for this week, I'm leaning to Harris. Green Bay's playing against Indy, which is a minus 3.4, but that's for running backs. Let me switch to wide receivers. I'm definitely not Doc Holliday out dueling in the streets right now. This is more like a sloth having a gunfight. Like he still hasn't got his gun out of the holster. It's not even that. Say when is way too fast. So New England Green Bay is who I'm looking for, minus 2.1 against Indy. So for this week only, I'm saying Damian Harris. I'd probably lean Harris rest of the season too. That's probably the way I'd lean, but it's close.
I saw somebody mention about Taysom Hill. He does, I guess, have tight end and QB eligibility this week in ESPN.
If he does, I'm picking up Taysom Hill. There's a lot of tight ends. I would start Taysom Hill over this week. I expect him to have a bigger role in the offense, and I would be fine. Now, I know we've got to qualify things based on, the feedback we've been given. So I'm not saying to start Taysom Hill over Travis Kelce. I'm not saying to start Taysom Hill over any of the top 6, 7, 8 tight ends. I'm talking about once you get down to those guys that rotate in and out of the top 12, I would be willing to consider, Taysom Hill in that range. I especially if you're looking for upside. I think Taysom Hill has got 20-point upside this week where most tight ends don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, Dwayne, we've been rocking and rolling here for an hour and 15 minutes. We're going to, mosey on down to the OK Corral and have ourselves a drink. So we want to thank every single one of you for joining us, listening in your car, on your headphones, while you're at the gym, while you're in line at the grocery store wearing a mask. Whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. Be safe. We're heading into the holiday season. We thank you for helping us get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
If you have not done it yet, please go over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Tell us how great we are, how much we suck, what beer we should drink next week. Just interact. That's all we're asking for. All right. So cool. Good luck, everybody out there. Hopefully you can stay in playoff contention. For Dwayne McFarland of PFF and ETR, I am Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com. We'll see you next week. Never get out hustled, folks. See ya.